Sagittarius. A secret meeting about you just ended, and someone left in tears. Dearest Sagittarius, something powerful has just unfolded behind the veil, where words aren't spoken aloud, and yet destinies shift. You weren't there. Your name wasn't uttered in the room, but your energy was everywhere. In the quiet chambers of the unseen world, where only the soul can enter, a gathering took place. Not one of mortals but of higher forces, your ancestors, divine protectors, and the very wisdom of the cosmos. They came together to speak of you, not with judgment but with reverence. And someone who once believed they had the right to handle your fate, left that meeting in tears. You've often wondered if anyone truly sees you, if the battle you fought in silence was ever acknowledged. This message is your answer, because you, Sagittarius, are not forgotten. In fact, the journey you've walked, alone, misjudged, misunderstood, is now echoing through the sacred halls of karmic reckoning. In today's video, I, Sophia, your guide through the emotional constellations, will walk beside you, not just to uncover the truth about what was spoken in that meeting, but to reveal how your silent strength has rewritten everything. If you've ever felt abandoned, misrepresented, or spiritually exiled, stay with me. Like an arrow finally reaching its mark, this is the moment when your soul is restored. Like, share, or subscribe if your heart whispers yes, because what comes next was written in the stars for you. Gate 1. They laughed at the fire you hid, but the universe has grown quiet to listen. There are moments in life when you try so hard to speak your truth, Sagittarius, but the world only hands you silence in return. You once stood in front of people you trusted, family, friends, even lovers, and tried to tell them your story. Not a story crafted for sympathy or attention, but the real one, raw and trembling at the edges. But the more honest you became, the colder their eyes turned. Some looked past you, others through you, as though your suffering was an inconvenience rather than a cry for understanding. You weren't weak, but you began to believe that maybe you were. Because they laughed when you were breaking. Because their comfort came at the cost of your silence. Because every time you raised your voice just a little, someone reminded you how dramatic you were being. And so you swallowed it all, your confusion, your disappointment, your unspoken rage, and buried it beneath your strength. Not because you wanted to pretend it didn't hurt, but because you had no choice. Sagittarius, the truth is, your soul was never meant to bend beneath their blindness. You were born under a sign ruled by Jupiter, the planet of wisdom, expansion, and sacred justice. Your path was never meant to follow the crowd. You were born with a wildfire inside, a truth that can't be tamed. And when that truth is silenced, the universe doesn't just watch. It listens. You didn't know it then, but every time you cried alone and still chose not to retaliate, something was stirring in the unseen. Every time you forgave without being asked, a light within you flickered brighter. Every time you endured betrayal and didn't let it harden your heart, you called upon the ancient forces of love. The fire you kept hidden didn't go unnoticed. It became the beacon that summoned the council of spirits, ancestors, and the divine. That's why, even though you were not physically present, your name was spoken in a room beyond this world. A decision was made about your destiny, and someone who once thought they had power over your path walked away from that meeting changed. Not because they were punished, but because they were finally seen for what they had done. And the light they once mocked has become a flame too bright for them to face. You've always believed in the truth, Sagittarius, even when it was painful, even when telling it cost you everything. You've chosen transparency over manipulation, freedom over conformity, and compassion over revenge. But that didn't protect you from being hurt by those who couldn't handle your clarity. Some people don't want to see themselves in standing next to someone like you. A soul who dares to be honest makes them uncomfortable, so they project, they distort, they rewrite the narrative until you become the villain in their story, simply for refusing to dim your light. You once stayed quiet to keep the peace, but what no one saw was that it wasn't peace at all. It was a silent war inside you, one between your soul's truth and the fear of being abandoned for living it. But silence, Sagittarius, was never meant to be your home. And now, finally, the silence is breaking, but not through your voice, through the judgment of those who once turned away. I want you to imagine this, even if it sounds impossible. A long table surrounded by beings of light, ancestors who walked barefoot through deserts and forests, who whispered your name into sacred prayers long before you were born. Angels whose wings stretch beyond time, folding around you in moments when you thought no one saw. The quiet presence of divine order sitting in the center, listening not to your words, but to your vibration, to the ache you carried with dignity, to the fire that never went out no matter how cold the world became. That's where the meeting took place. That's where decisions were made. And you, Sagittarius, were not there because you needed to plead your case. You were not invited because you needed to prove your worth. You were the reason the meeting happened in the first place. And someone left in tears because they realized what they had touched wasn't just another person. It was a sacred soul. It was you. Sagittarius, I know the road you've walked hasn't been smooth. You've been the wanderer, the truth seeker, the one who stands at the edge of cliffs and still chooses to leap, trusting that wings will appear. But sometimes even you grow tired. Even the wildest soul aches for a place to rest. And when the world fails to offer that place, it's easy to wonder whether you belong anywhere at all. But you do. Not just anywhere, but in the exact moment you are in now. Because this is the moment where the tide turns. Not through force, but through recognition. You are not broken. You are sacred. You are not a victim. You are a survivor of things no one ever saw. You've walked through betrayals that would have shattered lesser spirits. You've risen after collapses that left scars in places no one can see. And even now, you still hold the ability to love, to believe, to dream. That is why the meeting was called. Not to punish, not to settle scores, but to return to you what should have never been taken. Your dignity, your peace, your sovereignty. You once believed you were fighting alone. But the moment you chose not to become like them, the moment you kept your soul intact even when your heart was bleeding, that's when the universe said enough. And now someone, maybe more than one, is finally seeing what they did. Not because you exposed them, but because the light has become too loud to ignore. It speaks in sleepless nights, in unexpected misfortunes, in the quiet unease that trails their every step. They can't run from it because what they're running from isn't you. It's their own reflection. You don't need to watch their downfall. You don't need to witness their remorse. You only need to know that the truth always returns. And when it does, it returns not to make you bitter, but to set you free. So if you've ever wondered whether all your suffering meant something, let me tell you it did. It was seen. It was remembered. And now it is being answered. The universe doesn't forget those who walk in integrity. It doesn't ignore the soul who continues to shine even when covered in darkness. Sagittarius, your light is becoming undeniable. And the ones who once tried to bury you are learning a truth they never expected. That the soul they dismissed is the very soul now being defended by forces greater than any court on earth. Your part is not to look back. Your part is not to seek retribution. Your part is to rise, to step forward into the light that has always waited for you to return. Take a moment now, not to ask for anything, but to breathe into the knowing that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. You are no longer unheard. You are no longer unseen. You are no longer alone. The one who once laughed has gone quiet, and the silence is no longer your burden. It is your witness. If you feel a small softness rising in your chest, if a tear forms not from pain but from recognition, then you've already begun to heal. And that, beloved Sagittarius, is how light wins. Quietly, completely, without needing to prove anything to anyone. Gate 2. Someone was called by name while you remained silent. There are events that happen without fanfare, without announcement, without even your awareness. And yet they are the turning points that change everything. Sagittarius, you may not have been invited to that meeting. You may not have heard your name spoken aloud. But in a realm beyond sound and speech, you were the center of it all. In that invisible court where energies gather and justice does not require human evidence, your soul stood tall. Not because it demanded attention, but because it radiated something undeniable, truth. And someone else stood there too, but not in strength. They stood in trembling, not knowing that this moment had been prepared not to shame them, but to reveal the mirror they have refused to face for years. This was never about vengeance. You, Sagittarius, are not someone who chases retribution. Your fire is not petty, it's purifying. You would rather walk away with an empty heart than poison it with revenge. But that doesn't mean you haven't been hurt. You've been misunderstood, silenced, overlooked. You've watched people twist your story into something you don't even recognize. You've watched the ones you helped quietly turn their backs, pretending as if you never stood for them, never bled for them, never stayed up at night praying for their peace while they plotted your undoing. And the worst part is that you stayed silent, not because you were weak, but because you knew speaking wouldn't make them understand, it would only deepen their denial. And so you chose peace. You chose distance. You chose to let the universe remember what everyone else forgot. But now the remembering has begun. In that sacred space where your spirit has been weighed, not judged but honored, a new law has taken root. And it does not need your voice because your energy has spoken in your place. The truth that lived inside your bones, the pain you swallowed without complaint, the dignity you preserved even when you were reduced to nothing. All of that became your testimony. You didn't ask to be defended. You didn't plead for someone to finally see. And yet they did. Not just anyone, but the divine council that oversees the karmic unfolding of all things. They saw what you endured. They saw how many times you could have retaliated and didn't. They saw how many days you stood at the edge of your own hope and still didn't let go. And then they called someone else by name. Not to punish them but to remind them. That energy you mistreated? That person you discarded like a worn-out garment? That soul you manipulated for your own comfort? That was not just any soul. That was a bearer of light. And when you touch a sacred soul with cruelty, you don't awaken their anger. You awaken the very balance of the universe. Sagittarius, you are that sacred soul. You didn't have to say a word because the very absence of your voice echoed louder than any scream. Your silence was not a void, it was a vibration. And someone is feeling it now. They may still pretend. They may still post their curated joy, still laugh at parties, still sleep in homes they built on shaky ground. But there's a tremor in their life now. Not a punishment, a recognition. It shows up in the dreams they can't remember but wake up sweating from. It shows up in the awkward silences that weren't there before. It shows up in the way people suddenly step back from them, as if something in the air around them has shifted. And it has. The truth has returned, not as drama, not as scandal but as energy. The kind that cannot be controlled or reasoned with. The kind that only comes when a soul has been called to answer for what it once refused to acknowledge. And still you remain silent. Not because you're unaware, but because your soul is wise enough to know when it is no longer your turn to speak. There is a deep freedom in that, Sagittarius. You are no longer the one waiting to be understood. You are no longer standing at the door of their heart begging to be let in. You have moved. Not physically, spiritually. You have moved into a dimension where the truth is no longer something you chase. It is something you carry. And it will go before you now, into every room, every relationship, every decision. You no longer need to protect yourself the way you once did, because the light has gone ahead of you and is clearing the way. And the one who once dismissed you, they feel it. Not in a way they can articulate, not in a way they can explain, but in a way they cannot ignore. A stillness has crept into their world. Not peace, absence. The absence of something they never valued until it was gone. Your presence. Your prayers, your fire, your unconditional hope. They once believed you were naive. They once believed you'd always be there. They once believed they had outgrown you. But now they understand that what they mistook for fragility was grace. What they mocked as indecision was intuition. What they saw as a weakness in you was the very thing that had been shielding them from their own self-destruction. You never cursed them. That's why the consequences carry a different weight. They are not haunted by your anger. They are haunted by the realization that you never wished them harm. And yet harm has found them. That's the power of light. Doesn't need to curse. Its absence is punishment enough. When you carry divine fire, Sagittarius, the ones who betray you don't get away unmarked. Not because you harmed them, but because they touched a soul meant to awaken their conscience. And now they are awake. And they are shaking. Not out of guilt, but out of grief. Grief for the part of themselves they betrayed by harming you. And you? You are still here. Breathing. Expanding. Healing. Not because the pain disappeared, but because you refused to be defined by it. You could have closed your heart. You could have become like them. You could have used the very tools they used against you. But instead you walked away. You didn't just survive, you evolved. You didn't just heal, you elevated. And that's what they cannot comprehend. That after everything you still shine. That after everything you still believe. That after everything, you still bless the path ahead not just for yourself, but even for those who broke you. Because Sagittarius, your greatness is not in your triumph, it's in your tenderness. So let this be your remembering. You were never alone. You were never forsaken. You were simply being led into a moment that could not be rushed. And now that it has arrived, you no longer need to explain who you are. You simply need to be. The one who once had power over your story now walks outside of it. They are no longer part of your path. They are part of your past. And the page has turned not with thunder, but with truth. Take a breath. Let it all fall away. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let your heart speak its quiet gratitude. You are no longer in the courtroom. You are no longer in the fire. You are no longer waiting for a verdict. The light has spoken, and it has spoken in your favor. Gate 3. The one who walked out of the meeting no longer holds power over your destiny. There was a time when you believed the story of your life belonged to someone else. That perhaps the choices they made, the words they said, the silence they gave, were stronger than your own will to define yourself. You were not always the wild, untamed Sagittarius fire you are now. Once you waited to be seen, to be understood, to be loved in the way your soul had always known love should feel. You bent your light to fit into the narrow spaces they offered. You folded yourself into the shapes they preferred. You smiled when you wanted to scream, and you stayed, even when your heart had already left, because something in you still hoped. That hope was not weakness. That hope was your sacred memory trying to lead you home. But something has changed. That meeting, the one you didn't attend but that centered entirely around your name, did not end with anger. It ended with tears. Not yours. Theirs. And in those tears was the realization of something too immense to bear. That the very soul they once dismissed now walks freely in a timeline where they can no longer follow. Not because you are cruel. Not because you banished them. But because your destiny has outgrown the frequency they chose to live in. They cannot reach you not because you built a wall, but because the sky you are now flying in cannot be reached by those still crawling through deception. They once held the power to disturb your peace. A single message, a certain tone in their voice could send your day spiraling. Their absence echoed louder than their presence ever did. And you thought, why do they hold so much power over me? What is it about them that makes my soul ache so much? But Sagittarius, here is the quiet truth. It was never them. It was the memory of your own love being reflected back to you in distorted form. What you missed was never their presence. It was the version of you that existed when you still believed they could love you right. It was the dream you poured into them that kept you tethered, not the person. And now that dream has unraveled. The illusion has crumbled. Not through bitterness, through clarity. And clarity, when it comes, is always gentle but irreversible. You may not have noticed the exact moment it happened. Maybe it was a sunrise that felt softer than usual. Maybe it was the way your heart didn't race when their name appeared. Maybe it was the stillness that settled inside you when you realized you didn't need their apology anymore. That moment, however small, was the true beginning of your freedom. And they felt it. Even if they don't understand what they're feeling. They felt the closing of the energetic gate. The final breath of your old hope leaving the room. They felt you pulling your fire back into your own orbit. And it scared them. Not because they love you, but because they no longer have access to the warmth they once took for granted. And here's the part they never saw coming. You didn't walk away to teach them a lesson. You walked away because you finally learned yours. That waiting for someone to understand your worth is the slowest way to forget it yourself. That proving your loyalty to someone who betrayed, it is a silent way of betraying your own soul. That staying just to feel chosen is a dangerous game where your spirit ends up being the prize you lose. And so you left. Quietly. Completely. And with no ceremony. Just the sacred recognition that your story needs a new narrator. And that narrator is you. They may still think they can reach you. Maybe they're drafting a message. Maybe they're reminiscing about what they once had with you. Now coloring it with the glow of nostalgia that only exists in hindsight. Maybe they're wondering if there's a way back. But Sagittarius, your soul already knows. The chapter has closed. Not with hatred, but with reverence. Because not every ending has to be a battlefield. Some endings are temples, quiet, sacred, and echoing with the lessons you finally embraced. And in that sacred silence, You are becoming someone they no longer recognize. Someone they cannot manipulate. Someone they cannot read like before. Because you are no longer playing a role in their story. You are writing your own. Do you know what happens when a Sagittarius finally releases the karmic ties that bound them to someone else's idea of who they should be? They rise. Not with noise, but with purpose, with direction, with a fire that no longer flickers from doubt, but burns with certainty. And that's where you are now. No longer hoping they'll change. No longer wishing things had been different. No longer needing them to understand. Because the truth is, they were never the keeper of your destiny. They were just a chapter in the book you were always meant to write in your own hand. And in that secret meeting when they were called by name, not to be condemned, but to face what they've refused to see, they finally felt what you carried for so long. Powerlessness. The kind that comes not from being small, but from realizing you've run out of chances to make things right. That moment when they walked out of the room with tears not for you, but for themselves, was the moment the universe made it clear. They no longer get to shape your future. They no longer get to delay your joy. They no longer get to be the emotional center of your story. Because Sagittarius, you have reclaimed your orbit. You are the sun again. You are not circling around anyone else's gravity. You are standing in your light, not asking permission to shine. You are no longer reaching back. You are reaching forward. And in doing so, you are becoming the version of yourself that your soul has been calling toward all along. The one who leads with fire, not fear. The one who loves without losing herself. The one who walks away without needing anyone to follow. You don't have to be angry to let go. You don't have to hate them to move on. You just have to know that peace is more important than potential. And your peace, Sagittarius, is no longer up for negotiation. So let them cry. Let them grieve what they never valued. Let them wish for another chance while you stand in the doorway of a future that no longer includes their shadow. And let your heart expand, not with sorrow, but with the freedom of knowing that you've finally remembered who you are. This isn't the end. This is the unwritten page. And the ink is finally in your hand. Gate 4. You are no longer a victim. You are the chosen one. There's a moment that comes after the storm. Not when the rain stops, not when the sky clears, but when your soul finally looks around and realizes the storm has passed. You don't notice it right away. You're still expecting thunder, still flinching from the lightning, still holding your breath, waiting for another wave to knock you over. But then, slowly, quietly, something begins to shift. The silence doesn't feel threatening anymore. The stillness doesn't feel like punishment. Feels like return. And Sagittarius, that is what's happening to you now. You are returning. Not to who you used to be, but to the self you were always meant to become. Before they broke you, before they doubted you, before they tried to put out the fire you were born with. You are no longer the one waiting to be rescued. You are the one who has survived. And not just survived, but transmuted every wound into wisdom. You didn't walk away from the fire. You walked through it, carrying only the truth that couldn't be burned. And what remains now is not ashes. What remains is gold. The kind of gold that only appears after everything unnecessary has been stripped away. You are not hollowed out. You are distilled, refined, focused. There was a time when they misunderstood your compassion as weakness. They looked at your gentleness and saw softness. They mistook your forgiveness for forgetfulness. But what they never saw, what only the universe in your soul knew, was that your light was never a performance. It was your nature. And to be someone who keeps shining in a world that constantly tries to dim the light, that is power of the rarest kind. And that is why you were chosen. Not because you were louder, not because you were flawless, but because when others hardened, you remained soft. When others blamed, you kept blessing. When others ran, you stood still and listened to your soul. You once thought you were the one left behind, the one the world forgot, the one who loved too much, felt too deeply, hoped too long. But now, as you stand in this moment on the other side of betrayal, of abandonment, of heartache, you begin to see it differently. You were not left behind. You were being set apart, so that you could learn the language of your own soul, so that you could walk the long way home and know the terrain so well you'd be able to guide others someday. You didn't lose time. You gained depth. You didn't lose people. You lost illusions. You didn't lose your spark. You simply tucked it into your bones for safekeeping until the world was ready to see it again. And now they are. Now you are. The secret meeting wasn't the final chapter. It was the turning point. Because after that, the universe began to move around you differently. Doors that had been sealed began to creak open. Energies that once resisted you now make room. You'll notice it in the small things. The way a stranger smiles at you without reason. The way you speak your truth and no longer tremble. The way your own reflection starts to feel less like a stranger and more like a homecoming. These are not coincidences. These are confirmations. The shift is real. You are no longer the wounded one. You are the one who knows how to rise, not by stepping over others, but by standing fully in who you are. And Sagittarius, who you are, is someone the world has needed all along. The wild one, the seer, the truth bringer, the soul who cannot be tamed, not because you are reckless, but because you are rooted in a freedom that does not depend on anything external. You were not made to play small. You were not born to keep chasing people who don't see you. You were born to walk with vision. You were born to light paths in the dark. You were born to love, ferociously, tenderly, unapologetically. And the love you now carry is not just for others. It's for yourself. Finally, fully, fiercely. They don't hold the power anymore. The ones who once defined you, named you, judged you. That power has returned to where it always belonged, your own hands. And with that power you will not destroy. You will create a life that fits your soul, relationships that meet your depth, opportunities that reflect your truth. You are not waiting anymore. You are building, not to prove anything, but to simply exist in a space where your light is no longer dimmed. You've stopped asking for explanations. You've stopped trying to rewrite the past. You've stopped trying to be what others want, because you now understand. You are not here to be light. You are here to be luminous. And that kind of existence doesn't beg. It breathes. It radiates. It invites. This is not the end of your story. This is the moment your real story begins. Not the story they tried to write for you. Not the one you felt obligated to keep reading. But the one that flows from the deepest part of you. The one only your soul can tell. The one where you are no longer a victim. You are the voice, the vision, the vibration. You are not just healing. You are whole. And in that wholeness, your very presence becomes medicine, for yourself, and for those who still don't know they're searching for someone like you. Let the past grieve what it has lost. You're not there anymore. You are here. Awake. Alive. A light. You are no longer wandering. You have arrived in your body, in your truth, in your divine authority. You are the chosen one. And the world is about to see what happens when a Sagittarius soul finally remembers her purpose. Conclusion: you have returned to yourself, and the light is yours now. Dear Sagittarius, if you've journeyed with me this far, know that it's not because these words were extraordinary. It's because something sacred inside you has been quietly waiting to be seen. And now it has. In this space, line by line, truth by truth, you didn't just read a message. You remembered something. About your soul. About your purpose. About the light that has never left you. Not even in your darkest hours. You are no longer waiting for someone to hand you closure. You are no longer standing at a door that will never open. You have walked through your own gateway now. A place where healing doesn't require permission, and forgiveness no longer feels like defeat. You didn't come this far just to be strong. You came this far to become soft again without shame. To stop surviving and start living. To look in the mirror and not see someone recovering, but someone returned. And that return is everything. You have grieved. You have endured. You have been forgotten, misunderstood, judged. But you have also been loved by the divine, by your ancestors, by those you've never met, but who recognize your soul through the light you carry. You may have been harmed, but you are no longer harmed. You may have cried for years, but the tears now are different. They are not from pain. They are from peace. A kind of peace that only comes when you realize you never needed revenge. You only needed truth. And truth has finally arrived. So if something inside you feels different, lighter, quieter, stronger, don't rush past it. Pause. Breathe. Let it settle into your bones. Let it become your new foundation. And when the old voices try to return, the ones that made you shrink, apologize, explain, just smile. Not in spite, but in sacred certainty. Because now you know who you are. and no one can take that away from you again. If these words have stirred something within, if you feel seen, affirmed, perhaps even gently transformed, I invite you to support this circle of healing. Like, share, and subscribe, not for numbers but for the energy we are building together. For the light that travels farther when we carry it side by side. This isn't just a channel, it's a home. A place where your soul is always welcome, always heard, always held. And as we prepare for what's to come, remember, this was never the end. This was the door. The next chapter of your life will not require explanations, only embodiment. You are the living proof that the soul survives. You are the voice of resilience, of grace, of truth wrapped in gentleness. May your next steps be guided not by fear, but by inner knowing. May the choices ahead feel like freedom, and may the love you once gave away return to you tenfold, in forms you never expected, but always deserved. You're no longer returning to your past. You're rising into your future, and it begins now.